of the Greater Nashville UU congregation to welcome you here to worship this morning with us. Thank you for being here. Whether you are on Zoom or YouTube or in the sanctuary, we are glad to see you. Today we start our summer song series, which means that we'll have a different person, usually from within the congregation, speaking during the service for the months of June, July, and part of August. So this is always a really fun time to hear from each other. Let us gather together. Today, Bonnie is online with the Chalice Reading. And Sandy, would you like to come light the chalice, please? Good morning, Bonnie.
Good morning, everyone. This chalice lighting is written by Andrea Hawkins Camper. It's a little long, so bear with me. Blessed are we who gather with open hearts together in this space today. Blessed are we, the chalice lighters of resistance, justice, love, and faith. Blessed are we, the heretics, the outcasts, the walkers of our own way. Blessed are we, the border crossers, the refugees, the immigrants, the poor, the wanderers who are not lost. Blessed are we, the transgressors, the trespassers, the passers-by, the cause takers, the defiant, the compliant. Blessed are we, the hand extenders, the sign makers, the protesters, the protectors. Blessed are we, the trans women, the trans men, the non-binary, the cisgender, the multigender, the no gender. Blessed are we, the friend, the stranger, the lonely, the hidden, the visible, the authentic. Blessed are we who rise in solidarity. Blessed are we who cannot. Blessed are we who do not. Blessed are we, for this is our beloved community, and this is who we are.
Thank you, Bonnie. Unitarian Universalists do not ask, what do we believe? Instead, we ask, what values do we embrace? How will we work on those values together? Please join me in reading our congregational covenant if you feel so moved. We covenant together to make a welcoming community, to walk together in the way of truth and love, to seek the life of the Spirit as it is known by each person, to support each other in thought, word, and deed as we work to build a better world. Our opening hymn this morning will be number 76, For the Flowers That Bloom. If you feel so moved, you're invited to stand, whether you're on Zoom or in the room, and we can sing as long as we leave our masks on. So please do as you will to participate in this moment.
Giver of all, we thank thee.
joining in with that as you can. It's a new one for me. For today's Time for All Sages, we have a wonderful reading of Happy Right Now, a book that teaches the best way to be happy is to embrace the circumstances we find ourselves in each day. It was written by Julie Berry, illustrated by Holly Hatteman, and read here by Alyssa Marie Hutchinson. Please enjoy.
Happy Right Now by Julie Berry, illustrated by Holly Haddam. I'll be happy when I get a puppy, a unicorn, an ice cream sundae, and a castle with a friendly dragon. Or I can be happy right now. I'll be happy when the clock clicks the last second of the school day on the last Friday before vacation. Or I can be happy right now. I'll be happy when everyone adores me for being brilliant, brave, beautiful, popular, and amazing. Or I can like me right now and be happy just as I am. I'll be happy when the worrying monkey gets off my back, my chores are done, and nobody's grumpy. Or I can feed the worrying monkey a banana and party with him on a jungle gym. We'll both be happy right now. Why not? I'll be happy when the rainstorm slows, the icicles melt, the clouds leave town, the sun says, "Come play." Or I can be happy any day, in mittens and boots, or in soaking wet puddles. Wetter is better anyway. I'll be happy when the sneezing stops. No more sniffles and drips, no coughs, no ick, and I feel better. Or I can be cozy right now and snuggle down for a sleepy snooze. And if it's up to me to choose, why lose time being gray, being blue? All I need to do is be happy right now, whatever the day, whatever the weather. But what about when happy right now is a no can do? When the troubles and sadness are much too much, and feeling my feelings is all I can do, like a long goodbye or a puffy-eyed cry, or slow sorrows with no good answer to why. Well, that's okay too. I can breathe right now. In is 1, out is 2. Breathe again. Fill my belly, let it flow out slowly. Feel my body relax. Let my bones turn to jelly. Remember a now that was happy. Breathe. Borrow an old smile from a brighter day. Breathe. Know that happy will find me again soon. Give a hug and get one. Help somebody. Learn something new. Draw a picture. Bake a cake. Talk it out. Let it go. Take a nap. Take 2. I'll be happy when I'm hopeful, cheerful, helpful, thankful. Reaching for happy until I can grab it. No dragons required, but I would like a rabbit.
So our young folks at this point are invited to leave with Claire and Tina for their classroom. We're so glad you're here this morning. Thank you, and have a good time.
Thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember us who love you well. We know all the gifts you bring into the world each day. So thank Thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day.
June's Share the Plate partner is Just Us at Oasis Center. Just Us is a group of programs at Oasis Center dedicated to helping lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth to achieve their full potential. Just Us provides LGBTQ+ students a liberating space where they can be authentic and celebrate the fluidity of identity. Please give generously to provide LGBTQ+ youth who often face public intolerance and rejection an oasis of welcome. The climate around acceptance of LGBTQ+ youth in public schools right now is threatened by laws like the Florida Don't Say Gay law, as well as the banning of books that reference the LGBTQ+ community. It is important to provide a safe space for LGBTQ youth in our community. You might also be interested to know that within the Unitarian Universalist Association, our congregation is designated a welcoming congregation, which means that we have committed to learning how to undo homophobia and transphobia in our hearts and minds, our congregation, and our communities. Supporting the Oasis Center's Just Us program during Pride Month is a great way for us to support LGBTQ+ youth in our local community. Please take a moment to read about ways to donate while we play an introductory video. After the video, Fran will play an offertory, Daybreak, composed by Edwin McLean.
Hello, my name is Paige Regan. I'm the program coordinator for the Just Us programs at Oasis Center. Those programs specifically focus on the empowerment of young people who are navigating gender and sexuality, also known as the LGBT population. Just Us functions as a drop-in program every Tuesday afternoon. Any high school student who identifies on or around the LGBT spectrum or perhaps wants to engage in conversation about identity. We'll do art projects, some identity work, a lot with creative expression, self-reflection. But the ultimate objective is to create a community and a safe space where a young person can explore who they are and where they are. Research shows that LGBT folks are far more likely to drop out educational aspirations as far as college or beyond, decrease, truancy increases, particularly for transgender students. Oftentimes stressors such as bathroom access, or more often limited access to bathrooms, PE class, environments that are specifically gendered in nature cause a lot of stress and anxiety for transgender youth.
The sense of community at Oasis is definitely something that's kept me alive at certain points in my life. Just like finding people who have the same interests as me, going through the same issues as me, it was really empowering. The first time I just stopped going to school was like my junior year, and it was because I was really, really depressed, and it was just a really hard time for me to not be recognized as male. I'd lay in bed, you know, just for depression reasons. And then the second time I stopped going to school was due to like teacher conflicts that I would have. I had a personal finance teacher that asked me to bring a note proving that I was trans.
A lot of times teachers aren't going to know which students are transgender or identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. But if students can identify teachers who are open and affirming, that might be the difference between going to school or not. Having a teacher they can truly trust. And through unpacking personal bias, we're really attempting to partner with educators so that they're able to leave that bias at the door to fulfill their professional responsibility to students. I think it is helpful to know that I do have experience as an educator, and I know how chaotic that classroom can be. I know the real trials of classroom management. I know it's hard to affirm and recognize every student's identity, but it's mandatory. If we really value learning, we need to value who each of our students is.
Thank you, Fran. I have a short reading for you this morning, after which I'm going to ask that we just sit for a minute, maybe, in quiet together. This is entitled Sabbath Home, and it was written by the Reverend Kathleen McTeague. Even in our sorrows, we feel ourselves cradled in holiness we cannot comprehend. Into this home, we bring the courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home, we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Let us enter into a few moments of silence together. It is a blessing to be here together, to find a home and a shelter. This morning, our speaker is Gene Bryant, who many of you know because he's a longtime member of this congregation. He is going to talk to us about the fate of public education. Good morning, Gene.
Well, thank you, Reverend Denise, and good morning. It's good to be back in the sanctuary, although I must admit that Zoom has spoiled me. I've missed very few of the sessions, and I've enjoyed all of them. And after seeing the technical setup and the technicians at work, I appreciate even more what they have done to keep us together during this pandemic. I also am pleased to be able to discuss with you a topic that has been part of my life, all of my professional life, 40 years, and one that I have tried to keep abreast of during 20 years of retirement. So when you add those 4 decades and 2 decades of retirement. That gives you some idea which decade my birth years are in. You know, as Unitarian Universalists, I think we're all very socially minded people. And I know with all the talk about whether we can preserve our democracy, that all of us are quite interested in that. And one aspect of that I'm going to discuss with you today. A very basic democratic institution, American public education, is at risk. And I think a lot of people are aware of that, but I don't think they're nearly as concerned about it as they should be. I mentioned all my experience in education. I came to Nashville in 1971 to work with the Tennessee Education Association. But before that, I had been a teacher and a principal in East Tennessee in Cocke County. I don't know whether you're that familiar with that part of the state or not. But my hometown is Newport, Tennessee. And I'm sure most of you have traveled Interstate 40 into North Carolina. And Newport is the last town you go through before getting into North Carolina. Now, I started teaching in my hometown, my home county, and at a time when the Supreme Court had ruled that prayer and Bible reading were unconstitutional if they were imposed on students. Well, you cannot imagine the uproar in my home county when that happened. And in my first year of teaching, teachers were very confused because actually many of them had taught public school pretty much like they teach Sunday school. And not only were they upset by the Supreme Court rulings, they didn't understand what the court had actually said. And there were ministers in the community who were trying to organize church schools, Christian schools. There were parents who were pulling their kids out of public schools and teaching them at home. There were teachers who were still continuing reading the Bible the first period every morning. And even one teacher in the school where I was teaching called on a student volunteer every morning to pray. And after I taught 4 years, and then I became a principal. And every year I would take at least a day during in-service training to try to educate faculty on what the Supreme Court had said, what was appropriate and what was inappropriate. And also during all these years, I was working on a master's degree in school administration by attending classes at UT in the summer and in the evenings. And around 1968, my major professor said, "Well, it's about time we start talking about your master's thesis. Have you given any thought to the topic you would like to do research on?" And I said, "Yes, I have. I want to do research on religion and public education." And he was pleased with that because he taught school law. And in this research I did, and for the thesis, I tried to point out what the courts had ruled, what was unconstitutional, what was proper, what was improper. And when I finished the thesis, UT helped me publicize it. it got big play on by both wire services at that time. It was a news story in every major newspaper in the country. It was the cover story for Americans United magazine, Separation of Church and State. Every education publication in the country ran a summary of it. So it was really quite a big deal for a master's thesis. And partly because of that, I think I ended up at TEA, because at that time they realized that teachers were confused. They thought perhaps I might be able to help them better understand what the situation was. And also, they wanted someone who would do research on these groups that were attacking and trying to undermine public education. So I did that for about 10 years, well, actually 9 years. I prepared a lot of articles for our publications, and I actually joined a lot of these right-wing organizations that were called the New Right at that time. I infiltrated some of their meetings. I reported back to the TEA and the National Education Association some of the things that I was hearing. And then in 1980, the perfect storm, as I call it, really erupted. And the catalyst was this book, Free to Choose, by Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman had just received a Nobel Prize in free market economics. And he was someone that people would listen to. And this is from the book, his book, that he initially made the point that public education, which he called government schools, were socialism, and that public education was an island of socialism in a free market sea. His point was, this should never have happened in American capitalist society, and we cannot allow this to continue. We must find some way to break up this government monopoly of education. He went ahead and pointed out in the book that education is not the responsibility of the state, it's not the responsibility of government, it is the responsibility of parents. They should either educate their children at home, or they should find a church school for them, or if they wanted to find a private school for their children, then they should be responsible for paying the tuition. Taxpayers should never be responsible for paying for somebody else's children to receive an education. That's how radical this book really is. And much to my disappointment, a documentary was based on this book called Free to Choose. And practically every public television station in the country ran that, including our own Nashville Public Television. At the time, I was so upset with that I wrote a letter of protest and actually refused to contribute for a few years. But there was so much programming on Nashville Public Television that I enjoyed watching. I eventually overcame my protests and started giving money back to public television. Now, when I came to Nashville, Richard Nixon was president. Winfield Dunn was the first Republican governor we had had. The state was changing from conservative Democratic politics. It was changing to Republican politics. A Nashville teacher by the name of Helen Bain, I don't know whether any of you remember the name Helen Bain, had just ended her term as president of the National Education Association. Uppermost on her agenda while she was NEA president was to create a Department of Education. Then we had an Office of Education. She wanted someone to sit in the president's cabinet who was an advocate for education. And you may have recalled the tall apartment building on Abbott Martin as you go into Green Hills used to be called the Helen Bain Teacher Retirement Center. They have taken her name off. And by the way, Helen died in 2015. She was very active in assisting Jimmy Carter when he was governor of Georgia. He was truly an education governor. And she joined his campaign when he ran for president. And after he was elected, she began lobbying him to create the Department of Education. And he did, and recommended the Department of Education. And Congress approved. He appointed the first education secretary, Shirley Huffstadler, who was an attorney from California. But as it turned out, Jimmy Carter was defeated before she actually got moved in by Ronald Reagan moved in as president. And at this time, I should have pointed out when I was talking about Friedman, a lot of groups started supporting what they call school choice. And Friedman had said in his book and in his appearances that the only way he felt like that we could undermine public education was with a voucher system. And he said, vouchers are terrible. I don't like the idea, but I'm going to endorse school vouchers because that's the only way we can dismantle public education. And then there was a young woman at this time who was from a very wealthy Christian family who married into an even wealthier family that built its wealth by selling Amway products. And that woman was Betsy DeVos. And she had spent most of her adult life promoting school choice and ended up, as you know, as the education secretary. Well, after President Reagan came in, he had campaigned on abolishing the education department. And he appointed a commissioner of education who had been opposed to the creation of the education department, Terrell Bell, who was education commissioner for the state of Utah. Well, when Bell came into office, he was not really eager to abolish the department because he was the Secretary of Education. And as a result, a lot of Reagan's allies were upset with him. But anyway, he wanted to make the best of the position. So he told the president, I would like for you to appoint a presidential commission to study education and make recommendations. Reagan had no interest in doing that. So Bell appointed his own commission to do a study. They came up with what they considered the status of American public education. Its shortcomings were included, and then recommendations for improvement. They took it to the White House and asked for approval to release it. The White House said, we want to edit this report. We want to make it more sensational, and we want to we want to emphasize the shortcomings more than we do the recommendations. And this is how first of all, they made it sensational by giving it the title, A Nation at Risk. But then, this was the lead in their press release when they released the report. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. Now, you talk about getting sensational, that was pretty sensational. And of course, this made a big, big splash. Now, what I've just told you is in Terrell Bell's book, The 13th Man. He was the 13th cabinet officer. And over in the Heritage Foundation, which had opposed the creation of the Education Department, was a guy by the name of Bill Bennett. And that name will probably ring a bell with you. Bill Bennett was pushing to get rid of Terrell Bell. If he is not going to support elimination of the Education Department, let's get rid of him. Well, they did. They forced Terrell Bell out. And guess who replaced him? Bill Bennett became the Education Secretary. Then there was a divide in response to the report. One group said, we've got to fix public education. Whatever's wrong with it, we've got to correct it. The other side said, no, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to replace it with free market education. And so as a result, think tanks sprang up, lobbying organizations sprang up, and there was this huge debate about whether we fix whatever's wrong with education or whether we provide an alternative. During this time, there were two governors that were trying to become the education governors, both with presidential ambitions. One was Lamar Alexander in Tennessee, and the other one was Bill Clinton in Arkansas. And the debate on what to do with education carried on throughout the 1980s. And in the late 1980s, of course, George Herbert Walker Bush was elected president, and he appointed Lamar Alexander as Education Secretary. Lamar Alexander has never really been supportive of quality public education. Lamar Alexander really pushed education to elevate his own stature, and he ended up as Education Secretary, hoping eventually to become president. about the only thing that Alexander contributed to education while he was education secretary was he wanted to redefine the term public education to mean any type of education that is funded with tax dollars. That's what public education is. That was his definition. Then I'm trying to get back on track for my notes so that the slides will come in the right place. One thing Clinton did during this time, he created an organization called the Democratic Leadership Council. He said, we need to realize that unless we change our philosophy, then Democrats are never going to get back in power. So let's take some of the Republican concepts and let's claim them as our own, modify them a little bit and claim them as our own. His proposal was, we cannot support school vouchers, but we will promote charter schools as an alternative to school vouchers. And then when the young Bush was elected president, he recommended something called No Child Left Behind. What he wanted to do was test all the students, rank the schools or rate the schools based on test scores. And if a school had low test scores and they didn't improve, the schools, the parents in that school would be given vouchers to send their kids to a private school. Democrats were not in favor of that. But Ted Kennedy said, well, I'm interested in the accountability aspect of this. I can't support vouchers, but maybe we can modify it so I can support something. And so they agreed to drop vouchers, and instead they said, we will close a school, shut it down if it doesn't improve. Now I want to take just a minute to show you how faulty that is. Test scores are not determined entirely by the teacher or the school. There are factors out there that influence test scores, like, for example, whether a parent has a college education as opposed to an uneducated parent. There's a correlation between the education level of the parent and test scores. There's a correlation between family income and test scores. There's a correlation between school attendance and test scores. There's a correlation between kids who are homeless and kids who have homes. So there are a lot of factors. And realize that I'm not moving along as quickly. I may try to speed things up. But what happened under No Child Left Behind was that schools that had concentrations of disadvantaged children were labeled failures. Schools that had were mostly children from affluent or suburban schools, they were outstanding schools. And educators started saying, this is very unfair. And so a statistician from the University of Tennessee Department of Agriculture appeared before the legislature here in Tennessee, and he said, I agree with the teachers, this is not fair, but I can come up with a plan that will filter out all of these factors that you're concerned about and give you a pure score of the teacher's effectiveness. And the legislature, of course, bought it. This was called the Tennessee Value-Added Assessment. Well, for a long time, teachers kept saying, we want to know how you come up with this score. And finally, he released his formula. And this is it. Nobody can understand this. This is written in state law that teachers will be evaluated by this formula. And so in essence, we're stuck with it. Now, I was editor at this time of the TEA newspaper, and I interviewed Bill Sanders, the statistician, many times to try to get him to explain this formula in terms that anybody could understand. And I said to him one time, I don't understand how this formula takes into consideration all of these factors. And he said, well, I put data into it that takes care of that. And I said, well, show me with this formula where that data goes in. And he said, it's under student characteristics. And I said, well, show me, tell me what kind of data you put in there. And he said, well, the only thing we put in there is whether or not a child is on a free lunch. And that was supposed to take care of it. Well, folks, this formula is still in practice. It's not working. It's very misleading. It provides useless data, basically, for several reasons. It's a flawed process. But for several years, and you've probably been it's called 10 Ready, in case. You've probably been reading the results of the problems we've had with this. But the biggest problem is, other than it's being punitive, is that the state doesn't get the scores back until June, and the school year is closed down. And the legislature also put in law that the student test scores are supposed to be part of the student's actual final grade. Well, they cannot factor that into the final grade because the kids have already gone for the school. And we are spending in Tennessee every year $100 million on this process. That includes test development, test administration. Yeah. Okay. I realized it was dragging out so long. How much time can I take?
Why don't you take a second and think about the most important points you want us to leave with? Like this, the testing stuff is great. Whatever you think is most important. And
well, after No Child Left Behind, the Obama administration came in, and they had a program that's called Race to the Top. It did more damage in the long run than No Child Left Behind. And I wonder how I can summarize that quickly. But what happened is the Obama administration came in after a very deep recession, as you know. And they got all this stimulus money, $150 billion for the education department. And it was given to Arne Duncan, who knew practically nothing about education, to grant to the states to implement what he thought needed to be implemented. He stressed evaluating teachers again on test scores in charter schools. And there was a proliferation of charter schools during the Obama administration. And I, as you might guess, am a critic of charter schools. I have people say to me, don't you admit that there's some good charter schools? And of course there are, but that again is based on test scores. Charter schools have some advantages when it comes to test scores. One, they can screen their students. Two, they can send their rejects back to the public schools, the ones that bring down the test scores. But the really good charter schools are supplemented by outside money in addition to the taxpayers' money that they get. And there's a website I hope we can access, because I think you'll find this really shocking. It's the KIPP Charter School Network. And I think Jesse may be able to access it, and I'll quickly. Yeah. This website, even though it's called public schools, they're really private schools, lists their supporters. And if you can scroll down, Jesse, I want you to be able to see how filthy rich, okay, we'll stop here just a minute, how filthy rich this organization is. They could have a pupil-teacher ratio of 1-to-1 if they wanted to. These three organizations, including the Education Department, have donated $60 million to KIPP. And if you want to scroll on down, there are smaller contributions, but there are many who have given between $25 and $60 million. And we'll stop scrolling, but there are at least 15 or 20 contributors to KIPP. Let me skip over some of the slides, and I want to get to 3 summary points. And if I don't know.
Oh, Jesse, it's slide 25. You want to go to? Is that where you want to go?
Okay.
Slide.
Yeah, if we can get to slide 25. I'll tell you my concern. Well, I just wanted to point out to you that the fraud and abuse really increased while Betsy DeVos was in there. There were a lot of people who operated charter schools who took the money and diverted it to some of their own private interests. Let's go to the next slide, whatever it is. Oh, yes. We have the machinery in Tennessee where charter schools can completely overtake public schools. The governor has a commission that overrides any local decision. And if a local such as Nashville decides we don't want this charter school, then the governor's commission can say you're going to have it, you're going to take it whether you want it or not. And furthermore, Nashville taxpayers are going to fund it. And if we could go to the next slide. One of my greatest concerns is that as we get more and more vouchers to go into private schools, religious schools, these schools teach revised history, they teach revised science, and we're going to have more and more students that have a misconception of both science and history. And my final slide, I think, well, the final slide, I'll deal with this one, is that teaching has become so unattractive that teachers are leaving, retiring early and leaving, and there's nobody to replace them because young people don't want to become teachers. And in closing, next week or the week after, the Supreme Court is going to hand down some very damaging decisions, in my opinion. One, they're going to make it possible for charter schools to be operated by churches. Now, they are not supposed to be religious. And there's another decision they're going to hand down dealing with a football coach that you may have read about, which I'm afraid they're going to say that it's okay to have religious exercises at athletic events and probably in the classroom. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I just mistimed everything.
Thank you so much, Jean. It's really hard when you have decades of knowledge and experience and wisdom to boil it down to a few minutes. And I have to say, you did make sense of a lot of my experience as a public school parent. So thank you for that. I'd like to invite us to, actually, you know what, let's skip the hymn, I think, if that's okay with everybody. We'll sing after Joys and Concerns, I think. But, so Jesse, could you stop the live screen, the live stream, please? YouTube people, we're very glad you've joined.